Okay, wonderful. Well, welcome everyone. I know there's people who are still entering the Zoom room here, and that's fine. Please continue to come in. My name is Natasha Lance, and I am the COO here at the Center for Nutrition Studies. And it is a pleasure to have all of you join us today. Just a few housekeeping items for our fireside chat with Doctors Caldwell Esselstyn and Colin Campbell. There is closed captioning available. You just need to click on the CC button at the bottom of your Zoom screen should you need it. There is no chat available today, and there will be no question and answer session. This is a different type of webinar. This is the opportunity for you to sit back, relax, and listen to two great pioneers in the plant-based movement. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to today's host, Dr. Mike Hawley, who is the chair of the Medical Advisory Board for the Center for Nutrition Studies. Oh, and one more thing. Yes, there will be a replay of today's session, and you will receive that approximately 1 week from today. So sit back, enjoy, and relax. Mike, it's all you.
Thank you, Natasha. To say it's a privilege would be an understatement to sit here in this virtual room, if you will, with two of the great, Natasha used the word pioneer. I like that. I would also include icons, two of the great icons in whole food plant-based nutrition and the approach that so many people around the world are starting to take. I want to say good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on which time zone you're joining us from. We are so glad that you are here for our fireside chat with Dr. Colin Campbell and Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, sponsored by the Colin Campbell Center for Nutrition Studies. Gentlemen, thank you both for taking time out to sit down with us. I know a fireside chat in June sounds a little odd, but maybe there are some people in climates that a fire would be appropriate at this time of year, but certainly not for most of us. But we envisioned sort of an informal, casual chat with you all to really get not only just your professional, but some of your personal feelings about where you've been on your journey through life. I know both of you have your wives nearby as well, so it's great. Dr. Campbell has Karen, and Dr. Esselstyn has Ann nearby, so we they may need to jump in here and tell us a few things as well. Before I get started, I want to read bios for both of our guests today and just give you a little bit of background. Some of this you already know, some of this you may not know. Dr. Colin Campbell completed his education at Cornell University, earning his master's and PhD. He was also a research associate in nutrition, biochemistry, and toxicology at MIT. He is the Jacob Gould Sherman Professor Emeritus of Nutritional Biochemistry in the Division of Nutritional Sciences at Cornell. His research experience includes both laboratory experiments and large-scale human studies. He has received over 70 grant years of peer-reviewed research funding, mostly with NIH, and served on grant review panels of multiple funding agencies and actively participated in the development of national and international nutrition policy and authored over 350 research papers, most published in peer-reviewed science journals. He is the author of several books, including The China Study from 2006, one of the most widely read and impactful books about nutrition and health in the 21st century. His other books include Whole, The Low Carb Fraud, and The Future of Nutrition. Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn graduated from Yale in 1956 and received his medical degree from Western Reserve University School of Medicine in 1961. In 1956, he received a gold medal in rowing at the Olympic Games. In 1968, as an Army surgeon in Vietnam, he was awarded the Bronze Star. He was trained as a surgeon at the Cleveland Clinic and has been associated with the Cleveland Clinic since 1961. He was president of the staff and a member of the board of governors. He was chairman of the breast cancer task force and head of the section of thyroid and parathyroid disease. His accolades are many and include, in 2005, he became the first recipient of the Benjamin Spock Award for Compassion in Medicine. He received the Distinguished Alumnus Award from the Cleveland Clinic Alumni Association in 2009. In 2013, he received Yale University's George Herbert Walker Bush Award for Lifetime Achievement. In 2016, he received the Case Western Reserve Medical School Distinguished Alumni Award. Dr. Esselstyn has also received the 2015 Plantrician Project Luminary Award and the American College of Lifestyle Medicine 2016 Lifetime Achievement Award. His scientific publications are over 150. His pioneering research is summarized in his best-selling book, Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease. And in July 2014, his study of 200 patients confirmed an even larger group can be adherent to plant-based nutrition and achieve the same significant arrest and reversal of disease. Currently, he directs the Cardiovascular Disease Prevention and Reversal Program at the Cleveland Clinic Wellness Institute. Very, very distinguished guest that we have today. Both of you are in your 90th year, and you've already beaten the odds. I looked it up the other day. The life expectancy in the US has dropped now. It's around 76 years. So you all are way out in front of that. And I think what's important is not just that you're in your 90th year of life, but the fact that you're living healthy, robust, active lives is really a testament to your lifestyle. And we'll actually address that a little later in our conversation. But right now, I want to just start with, how did you two meet? When did you meet? What were the circumstances? And did you immediately agree? Because at the time, you were coming from different backgrounds, Dr. Campbell in academia and Dr. Esselstyn in clinical medicine. But tell me about those early meetings and how it all came about.
Well, I guess I can be the guilty one. That was in 1991 that I was trying to put together the first national conference on the elimination of coronary artery disease. This was in Tucson, Arizona. And in trying to put this faculty together, I had what I thought was a blue ribbon faculty of Ernst Winder from the American Health Foundation, William Castelli from Boston, also Alexander Leaf from Boston, Dean Ornish. And it was, while I was reading the New York Times, I happened to come across I think it was a op-ed piece talking about the Grand Prix of all nutrition studies, which was Colin Campbell's study in China. And I said, my gosh, that might be a very interesting fellow to have on this faculty. So I said, but nothing ventured, nothing gained. So I gave him a call, and Colin couldn't have been nicer, and he accepted. And so when he came to Tucson, I had a chance to meet him, and it was really quite spectacular to learn of his really studies, even back then, of the reversal of cancer. And one particular observation he had when he was looking at death certificates in a county in southern China, of all the death certificates in that county, there were none for the coronary artery heart disease, which was really quite striking to think that, as you look back on it, there are multiple cultures on the planet Earth. We knew that for over 100 years, where literally cardiovascular disease was virtually non-existent. So I would have to say that I think we had a great deal that was in common, and we had established our friendship at that time with, I think, mutual professional respect.
Colin, what do you remember about those early days?
Well, just to pick up on what Dr. Esselstyn said, he called me and I was pleased and surprised, quite frankly, with a very pleasant conversation at the time. And basically, and there was the New York Times article that came to his attention, I guess. And so he started telling me who he was and what he was doing, and the fact that he had gotten involved in working with patients, of course, and possibly reversing their disease, if you will. I think that conversation came up at the time. And I thought this was really spectacular, to say the least, because a few years before that, in the beginning of my research career, at the time with children in the Philippines, and then subsequently with experimental animals, we had learned something really quite spectacular. Namely, animal protein, when it is increased, turns on cancer. It promotes the growth of cancer. That was, to say that's unusual, is behind is unstated, quite frankly. But in any case, he had said that he was doing this with people. I said, wow. We did it in the experimental animals, turning and reversing cancer. And here he is doing it with the real people, if you will, doing it with heart disease. So that caught my attention immediately. And of course, then I learned about his own personal reputation as well. And then we got together because he invited me to speak to a conference he was organizing out in Arizona, having some funding from his late father, as I understood, who was a physician himself, a very renowned physician. So we did it in Arizona, talked there, and then later he organized another one in Florida at the Disney World. That was exciting. And back to the Cleveland Clinic and so forth. And so we had a lot of opportunity to visit with each other. And most importantly, from my point of view, I was organizing a course at Cornell University subsequent to that. And it was an unusual course in a way. And so we had some funding to invite guests in. And so I invited him to be a speaker in my class. And he did that for the next 6 years, every year. He was the most popular one. He really had an important message to say. And that was all very exciting that we did that. And so on that score, I mean, of course, he's working with people. I'm working with experimental animals by this time and turning cancer on and off and getting some very exciting evidence. And then later we, of course, crossed paths many times in the conferences here and there, and especially one in China, as I remember. I can't remember how we ended up there, but we did that. And yeah, so it was all very exciting. I mean, it was exciting from the standpoint that he's working with real people and looking at totality of the person. And he's using a kind of diet that really reflected on what I was learning in the laboratory too. So yeah, and it could be nothing better than coming together just like one message.
Exactly. I'm interested to step back a little bit further because Dr. Esselstyn, you went to medical school, and if it's back then it was the way it is now, there's not a whole lot of nutrition, if any, taught in medical school. Dr. Campbell, you were doing research not looking so much at plants, but at other things in the animal world. How did you both get initially interested in your work and get into the plant-based approach to things?
Well, I was after I finished my tour of duty in the military, after I finished my surgical training, I was a combat surgeon in Vietnam for a year from June of 67 to June of 68. When I returned to the Cleveland Clinic, I was offered a position in the Department of General Surgery. And it was by late 1970s, when I was chairman of the breast cancer task force, I became increasingly disillusioned, shall we say, with the fact that for no matter how many women I was doing breast surgery, I was doing absolutely nothing for the next unsuspecting victim. And that led to a bit of global research. And it was apparent that there are other cultures where breast cancer rates were 30 and 40 times less frequent than the United States, for instance, with Kenya. And breast cancer in rural Japan in the 1950s was very infrequently identified. And yet, as soon as the Japanese women would migrate to the United States by the second and third generation, they now had the same rate of breast cancer as their Caucasian counterpart. And even more perhaps provocative was when I went and looked at Japan. How many men do you suppose in the entire nation of Japan in 1958 were autopsy proven to have died from prostate cancer? 18, the most mind-boggling public health figure I think I've ever encountered. And yet by 1978, 20 years later, they were up to 187, which still pales in comparison to the 28,000 who will die from prostate cancer in the United States this year. But it was along around this time that I began to notice that there were multiple cultures that I was encountering where cardiovascular disease was virtually non-existent. And it just suddenly dawned on me that perhaps it would really be more bang for the buck if we could look at the most common killer of women and men in Western civilization, coronary artery heart disease, because if we could get people to eat to save their hearts, they would markedly diminish the likelihood of having the common Western cancers of breast, prostate, colon, and pancreatic. And that was sort of the background for getting a study started. It was a small study because I still had my surgical obligations, but in these 24 patients who were seriously ill with heart disease, when I was able to persuade them to eat plant-based, we began to get some exciting results. And that was really sort of the background on how I got involved with it. And it was after I'd been at this I started back in 1985. And by the time it was 1991, when in 1991, when I got so excited with the results that I thought it was time to have this national conference on the elimination of heart disease with this blue ribbon faculty. That's in essence the background of how I got started.
Great. Dr. Campbell?
Yeah, as I mentioned before, I really got started almost accidentally in the research that I was involved in the Philippines with these children. The idea there was that these malnourished and even starving children, a big problem, obviously in many parts of the world, the idea that somehow they were more susceptible to something like liver cancer when they were fed more animal protein, not plant protein. Animal protein was striking. Obviously, as I said before, I'm coming from a farm. I grew up milking cows and all that sort of stuff. And then I did my doctoral dissertation in advancing the consumption of more animal protein as a means of getting enough protein. So, and I was trained in that area. So to see this here, you can imagine, I didn't quite believe this. So we did it. We repeated a study that had been done sort of superficially in India at the time, but it was so striking. This effect happened within days, and we could turn on and off. I mean, it was just beyond belief. And so at a point, you really have to come and sort of face it. And at that point in time, because the biological effect was so impressive, obviously it occurred to me too at that time that this animal protein thing is kind of unique for animal protein, not plant protein. I became obviously curious about the idea that does this work on other diseases, chronic diseases, for example. And so when Dr. Esselstyn called me and told me about what he was doing, that just kind of filled in a little link for me that, you know, if it's working on cancer, okay, it's so dramatic, so fast, and he's doing it with people and reversing the disease. I can't believe it. I mean, that I can't quite even now believe it, that biology responds so rapidly in response to nutritional change. And I think I could speak for him as well. Of course, we see that now, you know, with people being able, when they change, we can see changes so fast. I'm sure, Dr. Holly, you've heard the same thing. So just the idea of getting into questioning the most revered of all nutrients, animal protein, if you will, and seeing this most feared of all diseases, also being a different disease, at the same time, cancer and heart disease. I mean, that really opened up a huge door to inquiry. And of course, at that particular point in time, and this is a little bit more than us, but nonetheless, I became interested in trying to understand, how does that work? I was at the time a professional in a sense in professional society of pharmacology. So I was thinking like you people usually do in medicine, you see a problem, now let's find a solution. Let's find a chemical, see if we can't deal with that. When in reality, that's not the way nutrition works. It's that all the nutrients, endless, countless, millions, whatever, are working together from a plant point of view and causing such a rapid change within days, if you will, in the case of humans. And so I think both of us are really kind of lucky to become aware, of what the other was doing. Somebody's looking after us, I think, because it was like a hand in glove kind of consideration, not just experimental animals, but, obviously humans. And then eventually when I got involved in doing the study in China, that at that point in time involved, pretty large number of 6,000 and some people. And it was, as Esther said, the idea, and I can remember this as at the time when you saw that, I think it was something like 365,000 consecutive death certificates. Only one was a cardiac CHD mortality. And that was so striking, my gosh. And so you can start comparing that kind of information then with other data in the world and seeing, how does the rate of heart disease, how does the rate of heart disease mortality compare with various and sundry dietary practices? I don't know. I think something was looking over both of us, kind of steering us into a common solution. So in your reference to your question, why plant-based? Obviously, it was an exciting development for both of us, and we came from different backgrounds. That was not what we grew up eating. In my case, professionally, I was being trained to believe in exactly the opposite. So it's still, I find it still very exciting that something like this should come across our plate and be so spectacular. And then come to realize too, why have we been so long trying to, understand this? Why hasn't it been known before? So yeah, it was that way. And so you had to invoke your name too, Mike, because you came into this somewhat later and saw the same thing as well in your practice. All very exciting.
Yeah. I came into it later, and quite honestly, it was the China study that launched me into the plant-based approach and the science there. And speaking of the science, just what you mentioned, Dr. Campbell, you were expecting something completely opposite, but the science showed you differently. And it's so great to see how you two took your backgrounds, academia, clinical medicine, and brought them together, and then started on this journey and path of plant-based nutrition to prevent, reverse, and treat various diseases, in particular heart disease. So this may be sort of a easy, obvious question, because you may say everything, but I want to know what have you two enjoyed the most about your journey? What have you enjoyed most about your life's work as you look back on it?
Go ahead, Ash. Yeah.
Well, first I want to back up a little bit to the first conference, because I learned something more about Colin at that time down in Tucson. And everybody was making their presentations, and obviously it was apparent that there was something to certainly be said for plant-based nutrition and heart disease. And so I had organized as we finished the conference, those presenters who were still there, we all agreed to sort of sit down, and we just sort of chatted about the conference. And it was really rather like a warm pablum. I mean, there was nothing, nobody was really striking the iron with what we had learned, what we had talked about. And Colin stood up and showed me the fire in his belly, and he just really absolutely made it perfectly clear that that we should actually move forward from what we had learned. And that was really rather striking. And so much so that I knew that when the results of this conference were just not as exciting as I wanted. And I thought the world, I was so naive. I thought the world would change on the basis of that conference. Well, nothing really much happened. And so I decided I'd try it another time. And this time we had over 500 doctors and nurses at Disney. And again, I asked Colin and Dean Ornish and a number of the other performers to come. And we really had a more robust conference. Yet one thing we learned, it's very difficult, and we still experience it today. There's a tremendous inertia when to get people to change their diet, and how do you make this actually happen? So it was really, I think the question you asked, Mike, was what is it that keeps you going? Well, for me, what keeps me going is the fact that the patients who call and want to come and be counseled continues. And every month I conduct an intensive counseling seminar that's run on the virtual Zoom basis. We limit it usually to about 20 patients, all of whom come with some degree of heart disease. And it's so gratifying, especially the ones that come with the chest pain and angina, when suddenly, if they do this right, they realize that within 4, 6, 8, or 10 days, their angina is markedly diminished, or in many cases, it disappears. And there's really nothing more exciting and gratifying than here are patients often who've had this kind of problem for years, and they've been taking all kinds of pills. They failed their stents, they failed their bypass. And suddenly they realize by getting rid of one pile of delicious food that is destroying them for another pile of delicious food that is going to enhance their health, it almost brings tears to their eyes to feel that they themselves are the locus of control for this hideous disease that is trying to take them out. And that's about as exciting and gratifying as it can get, other than the fact that you can perhaps persuade other healthcare givers to do this as well.
Yeah. Colin, what keeps you going?
Yeah, well, the main thing for most of my years, at least, it was my students. I loved working with students. I had quite a large group of graduate students at the time, and so we were in the business of being skeptical, if you will, which science is supposed to do. And I sure did have a skeptical observation in the very beginning. So it was an opportunity for me to arrange for my students, the doctoral students especially, to do their dissertations on exploring the question of, if animal protein turns on cancer like that, it's so striking, how does it work? I mean, everybody wants to know that kind of thing. And so it usually took 2 or 3 years per student, because they had to develop methodology and that sort of thing to explore it. And after about 12, 15 years or so, one student at a time looking for the mechanism to account for this effect. Mind you, as you well know, both of you know this, of course, if we can understand the mechanism for something like this that we don't like, and we want to keep on eating the food, the idea is, well, let's find a drug to block that thing, so we can keep on doing what we want to do. So we started looking for mechanisms, and just to illustrate a couple of points, what I mean by mechanisms, when we eat animal protein, for example, it increases the rate at which chemical carcinogens go into our cells. And then it turns around and increases an enzyme that metabolizes it to lead to mischief. And then it decreases a couple of mechanisms that are there to protect us, on and on. And so I just saw this again and again. After about 12, 15 years, I said to myself, I don't think there's a mechanism here. That was the most fundamental thing I ever ran across in my life, just to come to that realization. There's not one thing like that can account for this big effect. And it also became, I became aware of the fact that all these mechanisms change together without exception. So when we consume, for example, in my hands at the time, it was animal protein. You increase animal protein, and mind you, this is experimental animals at that time. but it also proved to be the extent to which we could do this kind of thing in humans too. As soon as we start eating that kind of food and not consuming the food we should be eating, like antioxidants and fiber and so forth and so on, plants, all this stuff went to hell in a handbasket in a sense. It was just like, and what's happened within, I don't know, milliseconds, I guess. That's the way the body works. And I just became so fascinated with that concept that I eventually called holism with a W on it. That somehow it's just a remarkable thing because it begs the question, how does that happen? I tend to think this is an illustration, this is an image of Mother Nature. And so then coming back to what Dr. Esselstyn said was his patients, he's working with the whole patients, using whole food. He's not using individual nutrients. And so once again, it kind of dovetailed. As to what you were doing, you were getting such remarkable results so fast. I mean, I saw the same thing in the laboratory. And so eventually I'm now in a place where I'm very comfortable with redefining nutrition. Nutrition is not about single nutrients doing their thing, one at a time, especially or independently. It's just that all of them work together as long as from the right food. If it's basically plants and basically in a whole food form, if you will, then Mother Nature gets a chance to look at all that stuff when we consume it. We start absorbing it, it starts doing its work. So that observation or that query that I got involved in and trying to understand how does this animal protein effect cause cancer? Then it was heart disease, and I got involved in literature, I mean in the history, because I thought at that time, you know, where did we go wrong? And I started looking at the history, and now I have to say one of the most exciting stories that I find is going back into history and learning where did we go wrong? Why haven't we known this before? It's so spectacular. And of course, I was remembering that study as you did, I should say Dr. Esselstyn, but in any case, that study that you did with your patients, 200 patients, I remember that so well because what you did, you went back and you found, you checked on them 3 to 7 years later, I know the numbers, you checked on them and found out how they were doing, were they staying with it? And you learned that you found 178, I think, by phone call at that time. And only one of them passed away. I knew him; he was a friend of mine. But I learned later from his wife who wasn't quite doing it well. But set that aside. What happened was 178 patients you called, and you talked to a person about this, and you learned that all of them, 178, every single one of them survived and did well. 178, 177 out of 178. It's amazing. And so that idea of seeing such a rapid response like that in humans is what I was seeing in my laboratory, involving a whole bunch of stuff. It was once again, it was kind of a dovetail kind of thing. What you were looking at humans, and so I have this whole different idea of nutrition now myself. That there's nothing in animals, there's nothing, food and animal protein especially, that's going to do us any good. And so, you know, eating plants and lots of different kinds of plants, and then at the same time, we go talking about heart disease, you and I, and cancer. Gosh, you, our friend Dr. McDougall, and others have, you know, sort of gone down this path a bit too, and we see people being able to recover all kinds of illnesses, whether it's chronic kidney disease, or even osteoporosis, or diabetes, etc. So I don't know. I do get excited about the concept that nutrition is the way to go. It's the right centerpiece for our future in this world. Anyhow, said enough. It's kind of exciting. That's what kept me going, Mike, was having students. I love students. You know, you're the young people. They're curious. They don't quite know what they're doing when they come in, of course. And we take them through some training and learn something about the concept of science and the concept of research and just discovery. That's what it's all about. Nothing more exciting than a way and making a discovery nobody's seen before, putting it together. It's just really nice.
Dr. Esselstyn, were you going to say something?
Well, it was just Yeah, I wanted to say that one of the criticisms that has been offered for as long as I can recall, since being in this research business with heart disease, one of the stumbling blocks is that but physicians will say that, okay, you've got that data, but it's really not going to apply to most people because really it doesn't, they're not going to eat this diet change. It's too radical. And I think that Colin sort of reviewed a little bit our study there. Why was it that we had close to 89.3, almost 90% adherence, close to 3.75 years to this program? Why did they adhere? Because if you're going to have a patient in your office for 10 or 15 minutes and ask them to make this significant lifestyle change, and it is significant, no question, it's not going to work. The only way to make this work is you must show the patient respect. And the only way that I know to show the patient respect is to give them our time. So on our present format, when we see these 20 patients once a month, or when we have that conference, the seminar, these people are going to have a 5-hour conference, 5 hours, a single day, and they're going to learn all about how they have created their disease and precisely how we're going to empower them as the locus of control to halt it. And in addition, my secretary will give me the phone numbers of the 20 who are attending. And about 2 weeks before the seminar, I guess I'm a little old-fashioned, I personally call each of them so that I can get my arms around their story and at the same time give them an opportunity to ask questions of me, so that when they do come to the seminar, we have a strong platform from which we can all move forward. Because really, the other reason that I think it's successful is you're willing to share with the patient what is the causation of the illness. Really have them get their arms around what has caused their disease and how they have caused it. Because there's been a basic covenant of trust ever since the days of Hippocrates, that whenever possible, the caregiver will share with the patient what is the causation of the illness. And sadly today, in all due respect to my cardiovascular colleagues, that's not being done. And I think that's such an actually powerful tool that is being avoided. And really, it's not entirely the fault of our colleagues, but because they never get any nutritional training in medical school and none in their postgraduate years. And I think that's still a hurdle that we have to overcome. Why don't we have this kind of eating in schools? Why don't we have it teaching in medical schools? Why don't all doctors and nurses become intimately aware of this? Those are the sort of the challenges that are ahead. I didn't mean to go sideways on you, Mike. Give me your question again.
Well, no, you answered it. I was looking for, what has stood out to you as something you've enjoyed about your work, and along with that, I'd like to know if there's like one thing as you look back that you say, that was a really satisfying moment, a really proud moment in my life's work that stands out. Is there something for each of you?
Sure. Yeah. When you see the actual reversal of disease, I mean, that's you see it reversal. It can be identified by a repeat angiogram, an angiogram at baseline that shows the blockage, an angiogram later that shows it going away, or you can show it reversing with ultrasound. As you can see in the carotid arteries of the brain, you can see that blockage going away. You can see the same thing happen in the legs, so that you get these symptoms of claudication going away, of angina going away, and of course, erectile dysfunction going away. That seems to be one of the popular results that we get.
Yeah, for the men anyway, right? So, yeah.
No, it's for the women as well.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. Colin, is there something, you've had many years of research, over 350 papers. The cancer one you mentioned, turning on, turning off. Is there another one that stands out to you as, wow, that was a aha moment, a satisfying moment in my work?
Yeah, they all seem to be very excited because one after another, and finally, you get to a point where you start taking all these threads and weaving them together, and that concept of sort of getting a feel for, oh my gosh, this is different than what I had been taught, what we tended to believe, what I taught. I taught nutritional biochemistry myself at Cornell for many years, and you look at one thing at a time and trying to fill in all the blanks, the details. But the idea of webbing it together, that was very exciting. I would like to return to another comment, though, too, about that I found something really intriguing. I think is good for this conversation. I've been quite a number of times to Italy, working with some folks there who have an enthusiasm for this kind of approach. And they learned something that I'd like to relate because it was so germane, I think, to an explanation or that has an explanation. The question oftentimes arises that when we take a group of people and put them in a so-called jumpstart program, 10 days or something like maybe 2 weeks, and just change them just like that. I'm sure you've probably done that yourself, Mike. In any case, what we know from that, even people who are ill and they see the benefits within 10 days, they tend not to stay on it. It's puzzling. So I hear this a lot. I see it, but I can't quite do that kind of thing. Well, I think we have an answer to that, quite frankly, coming from my colleagues, my friends in Italy. Namely, what they did, they organized a 9-day session with a group of folks. They felt good. Then they turned around and asked them at that point in time, would you like to do it another 15 days? Well, see, by that time, in their mind frame, they're kind of liking it. Yeah, I'll do it for another 15 days. And they did that for 3 successive times. And by the time they got to something like 60 some days, everyone, 100%, they're on board, which reflects something I think that I'd like to mention here, namely, changing diet is difficult. We all know that, very difficult. But when people give their bodies enough opportunity to become adjusted, like knowing taste preferences, for example, when we get to that point, we have to work at it a little bit, obviously, in the beginning, stay with it. We finally get to a point, and then our bodies are talking to us, to our minds. Say, I'm already there. Now I enjoy it. I'm not going back. So I would just, for the sake of this discussion, suggest that adjusting to taste preferences, which we've had a whole lifetime doing, all of us, eating the wrong food, perhaps. But when we give our chance enough opportunity to really get used to it and feel it, we're in. We're already there. And so, I see that I can, don't have time here, but I like to be able to bring it back to, explaining it in a sense of the holistic idea of nutrition. Everything working together. It's a very responsive, very rapidly changing kind of thing. One more thing you mentioned too about school lunches. We had a marvelous student at Cornell who did a doctoral dissertation on this of actually, and Dr. Esselstyn is on her committee as well as myself. And she did a study for her doctoral dissertation on taking a bunch of school children, teaching them in various interesting ways and getting them to change. Unfortunately, she ran a bit of a snag because these ideas challenging a school lunch program is not very easy. But nonetheless, it was a marvelous, I thought, attempt by a very accomplished woman at the time to really, get people educated and that included, having experience with international students and had experience with preparing food and you name it. It was the whole package put together. And I say, I would suggest that what we're talking about, Dr. Esselstyn, of course, talking about a lot about heart disease and his work with his patients, and don't talk about, the science behind it and stuff like that. The idea is big that you talk about so well yourself, Mike, when you're talking to patients. I've been there, heard you say it. The whole idea. What I'm trying to say here is some of this whole idea of medicine. I'm biased, maybe, but I think it starts with the food we put in our mouth. How do we prepare it? how do we make it tasty? How do we stick with it? The kind of thing. How do we get our kids to do it? This is such a big issue. And for me, and I think for many now, it also touches on something else in our society. It touches on the way we prepare food. It touches on the way we create food sustainability systems, so that we don't tear our environment apart. I just see we're sitting here right now at the bud stage of a beautiful blossom, it seems like to me. And once it flowers, once it comes out, there's so many things that this touches on, not just our personal lives and the cost of healthcare and all that sort of stuff. It's total. So I think, and just to come back to the metaphor, I guess you could say, of what S and I discovered between ourselves, we're good friends. And what he was doing, really well, was his patience and seeing a result. What I was learning in the laboratory, it just came together like just a really neatly woven web that can't be taken apart. And so I don't know, there's so many stories here we could talk about, spend some time on focusing on some details. But
yeah, those are excellent points, Colin. And I know one of the things that you've struggled with is this concept of reductionism, and the fact that, in medicine, we're sort of trained to, drug does this, so we study it this certain way. And you pointed out many a times that it's not just one nutrient or two nutrients, it's the totality, the whole approach to nutrition. And that's sometimes a little hard to share with doctors. Sometimes we don't always think that way. We're trained differently in medical schools. So yeah, excellent. Let me ask you both this. Dr. Campbell, you wrote a book entitled The Future of Nutrition, published about 3 years ago. Can you both comment on how you see the future going forward? What do you see for the future of nutrition in medicine, in the world? You touched on sustainability, just kind of how you would all envision, and maybe what recommendations you have for us all going forward with nutrition.
Well, you mentioned that one book, The Future of Nutrition. That's true. I actually wrote that with my grandson, almost. So spanned 3 generations now. What I was interested in talking about in that book was thinking about the future, of course, and the future relies on the past. We all know that. Those who don't observe history are bound to repeat it. A famous old statement, for a long, long time. And so this thing that we're talking about here does have a long tail back into the past, and it has a future. And what I was trying to tell in that book was not only the past and some lessons learned, but also how the mistakes we made during our lifetime, and perhaps 2 or 3 before, the kind of mistakes we made to get us into the position we now are. I'm not very happy, and I suspect you two aren't either in many ways. We made mistakes. We're living with the mistakes. And so I try to illustrate in that book, some of those mistakes. How can we correct them and tell why they are mistakes, if you will, right, based on history that preceded it, and then move forward, because we can't. It's hard to move forward unless we know well where we get our biases from, where we get our habits from. And so, to me, knowing the future, you have to draw on, the present and the past, in a sense, and look at it from multiple perspectives at the same time. That is fascinating. I think we do have an opportunity for the future, but we've got to really understand. When I say we, the totality of the human race, if you will. We got to know the totality of the problems we have created. Not accident. I mean, not purposely. We're just kind of mindless. We do our things, and then we just end up with these problems. Now we have them. Now we got to solve them. And so I just really, I'm still really loving this idea that what the two of us together did, in a sense, was very special. It's almost beyond beyond me, I guess beyond Esselstyn. And we saw what we saw. And it was so convincing. It was so convincing, so critical. So critical to personal health. And it's the weaving things together in a sense, building a sort of a consensus, knowing where it starts and knowing where it can go to if we don't do it right, kind of thing. I don't know.
Right. Dr. Esselstyn, how do you see the future of nutrition specifically?
Well, I really think that compared to where we were 34, 35 years ago, I kind of see a seismic revolution. But before I mention what the seismic revolution will be, I want to just share a story that often patients will call, but maybe it's the daughter, often it's the daughter who will say, my father is, deep into his 80s. Is it, how old in a patient will this work? So I will share with you that the oldest patient that I've ever started with was 87. And he had been told at that time that he was a candidate. He had to have coronary artery bypass surgery, where they have to sort of saw you in half and take veins from your leg and put them on your heart to bypass the blockages. But Stanley was really convinced that the operation would kill him. So he came, and he was an absolute marvelous student of whole food, plant-based nutrition. And he was from the West Coast, California, but he would call me at least twice a year with a progress report. And it was interesting that last year, about June, he called, but he wanted to speak with Ann because he wanted to get a recipe, because he was having a dinner for really I guess it was about 80 or 90 people. And she gave him a vegetarian menu, which he served. And then she asked, what's the party for? Stanley replied, well, it was my 100th birthday.
Wow.
Now, the interesting thing about reminded me of this was that it just so happened that yesterday Stanley called, and he reminded me that it was now his 101st birthday.
Wow.
So I have to revise when somebody says, who's the oldest patient that you've ever worked whole food plant-based nutrition for? Stanley comes to mind. Now back to the seismic revolution. I think the seismic revolution in health that is really at our doorstep is really never going to come from an invention of another drug, another stent, another bypass operation. But the seismic revolution in health will occur when we in the profession have the will and the grit and the determination to share with the public what is the lifestyle, and most specifically, what is the nutritional literacy that will empower them as the locus of control to absolutely eliminate chronic illness. Because it's not just heart disease, right? You can include cancer, you can include strokes, you can include diabetes, you can include hypertension, you can include Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, multiple sclerosis, allergies, and asthma, and the list goes on. This is perhaps the greatest gift that medicine has had in hundreds of years.
Yeah, that's great. When I first started doing all of this and I was putting together my various presentations on heart disease and diabetes and cancer and weight loss and all of that, and I was naive to a lot of this. I thought, well, there's got to be a certain diet for heart disease and a certain diet for this and a certain diet. When I put it all together, I said, it's the same diet for everything. And that gets back to Dr. Campbell's comments about, the whole picture and not trying to reduce it down to this supplement or that supplement. Yeah, exactly right. And what I hear you both saying is that the science is important. That's how the two of you got going. But then Dr. Esselstyn, you commented on how it takes time, and it's important to give of your time to your patients so that you can educate them and help them to understand. And Dr. Campbell, you pointed out, it's getting used to those tastes. It's changing your tastes and all those things. So it's not just educating the people, it's also showing them like Ann and Karen do, show them how to cook, what recipes are needed, and that sort of thing. It's a very complex but doable approach. You know, both of you are well into the blue zone range. And I mentioned earlier that, you know, you're not just living, you're living robust and active lives and healthy lives. So if you were to give some take-home messages to our audience, what sort of, you know, drawing on your wisdom, your scientific background, your practical experiences, what would you share with people going forward? Maybe some of those that are struggling a little bit to make some of these changes. What sort of advice would you all give? Take home messages, and whoever wants to jump in first, go for it.
Yes, go ahead.
Well, yeah, this may take a minute or two.
That's fine. We got it. We got the time.
I think the message that is so important is to have patients understand the mechanism. And I'm going to take a moment to explain what I think is the understandable mechanism about heart disease. For example, I think all experts would agree that where this disease has its inception, its beginning, its onset is when we progressively injure the lifestyle, the life jacket and the guardian of our blood vessel, which happens to be that delicate innermost lining called the endothelium. And the endothelium manufactures a truly magic molecule of gas called nitric oxide, which is responsible for the salvation, preservation, and protection of all of our blood vessels because of its remarkable functions. For example, nitric oxide will keep all the cellular elements within our bloodstream flowing smoothly like Teflon rather than Velcro. It keeps things from getting sticky. Number two, nitric oxide is the strongest blood vessel dilator in the body. When you climb stairs, the arteries to your heart, your arteries to your legs, they widen, they dilate. That's nitric oxide. Number three, nitric oxide will protect the wall of the artery from becoming thickened, stiff, or inflamed, and protect us from getting high blood pressure, hypertension. Number four is the absolute key. A safe and normal amount of nitric oxide will protect us all from developing blockages. And so literally everybody on the planet Earth who has cardiovascular disease, whether they're from London, Berlin, Chicago, New York, or St. Louis, it's because in the previous decades, they have so sufficiently trashed, injured, compromised, and turned their endothelial system into an absolute train wreck that they no longer have enough nitric oxide to protect themselves from making blockages and plaque. However, the good news is that this is not cancer. This is a benign disease. And once you can get patients to understand that never, never, ever again are they to pass through their lips a single morsel that is going to further injure an already train-wrecked endothelium, because then the endothelium recovers, makes enough nitric oxide so we can not only halt disease progression, but we often see elements of disease reversal. So what are the foods that every time they pass our lips, we injure the endothelial cells? They are any drop of oil, olive oil, corn oil, soybean oil, safflower oil, sunflower oil, coconut oil, palm oil, oil in a cracker, oil in a chip, oil in a piece of bread, oil in the salad dressing. Also, we want to eliminate animal protein, right? Meat, fish, chicken, fowl, turkey, and eggs. Also, we want to eliminate dairy, milk, cream, butter, cheese, ice cream, and yogurt. Also, we want to be very careful about sugar. Go very easy on the sugar. And now you really have it. So what are you going to eat? You're going to eat all these marvelous whole grains for your cereal, bread, pasta, rolls, and bagels, 101 different types of legumes, lentils, and beans, all these marvelous red, yellow, and green leafy vegetables, some white potatoes, sweet potatoes, and some fruit. And now you've got it. And there are wonderful books out there that now tell us exactly how to do this. But the other change that I've made really in the last decade is that a change that was in recognition of the fact that the endothelial production of nitric oxide is age dependent. For example, you never heard of an 8-year-old boy or girl having a heart attack. They have nitric oxide coming out of their ears, but by the time they're beautifully healthy, at age 50. They now have 50% of the nitric oxide they had when they were age 25. And by the time you're 80, you've lost 70%. So the change that I made was a greater stimulation of the endothelial production of nitric oxide. And we embraced the newer research that shows us that mankind has an alternate pathway for making additional nitric oxide. So let's take a look. I need these patients 6 times a day to chew, not smoothies, not juicing, to chew a green leafy vegetable that's approximately the size of 1/4 of their fist after it has first been steamed or boiled 5.5 minutes, so it's nice and tender. And then they must anoint it with several drops of a delightful balsamic or rice vinegar. Why? Because research has shown us that the acetic acid from those vinegars can restore the nitric oxide synthase enzyme contained within the endothelial cell that is responsible for making nitric oxide. So they're going to chew this alongside their breakfast cereal, again as a mid-morning snack, again with your lunch and sandwich. That's 3, mid-afternoon 4, dinner time 5, and of course I adore it when you have that evening snack of arugula or kale. Now, a second benefit that comes from chewing the green leafy vegetable, it restores the capacity of your bone marrow to once again make the endothelial progenitor cell, which will replace our senescent, injured, worn out endothelial cell. And the third benefit from chewing the green leafy vegetable is the third benefit. When you're chewing a green leafy vegetable, you are chewing a green nitrate. As you chew this green nitrate, it is going to mix with the facultative anaerobic bacteria that reside in the crypts and grooves of your tongue. Those bacteria are going to reduce that nitrate to a nitrite. When you swallow the nitrite, it is your own gastric acid, which is going to further reduce that nitrite to more nitric oxide, which can enter the nitric oxide pool. So think about it. What you're doing for minimal expense, no side effects, all day long, dawn to dusk, morning to night, you are absolutely restoring nitric oxide, the very molecule, the deficiency of which gave you this disease in the first place. Now, there is a caveat to this. Toothpaste with fluoride, public drinking water with fluoride, or mouthwash can injure the beneficial bacteria in your mouth. And I do not like antacids because antacids will lower your gastric acid and you will be unable to reduce the nitrite to more nitric oxide. Now, the question is what are the top 6 vegetables? They are kale, Swiss chard, spinach, arugula, beet greens, and beets. However, if you want the entire list,
Yes, please.
bok choy, Swiss chard, kale, collards, collard green, beet greens, mustard green, turnip greens, napa cabbage, Brussels sprouts, broccoli, cauliflower, cilantro, parsley, spinach, arugula, and asparagus. And the reason I go through that with you, you have to know how whole food, plant-based nutrition can also enhance your memory.
Yeah. Excellent. Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Esselstyn. That was excellent and beautifully said. And thank you for listing the full list of vegetables for us, the greens. Dr. Campbell, what advice would you give for those that are trying to make all this work?
Yeah, well, first off, I have to make a comment. Dr. Esselstyn and I are good friends, and so we don't think exactly alike on some things, and that's what makes a friendship really work, in my view. So I understand what as is saying. We've talked about this before. I've heard him say it many times. The only thing yes that I would say, okay, I understand that that's a good way to convince patients and tell them here's a little science and this works. People have shown it, et cetera, et cetera. But the one thing that concerns me about too much focus on 1 or 2 or 3 things like that, even though they may sound fancy and nice, is that it tends to open the door for the opportunity to find simple solutions, especially in the name of the individual chemicals like drugs and so forth and so on. And so I would suggest there's a risk of maybe narrowing the message down too much and then leave sight of the whole. And I want to offer, now it's going to sound like I'm sort of talking your story, quite frankly, but I want to say it in a slightly different way. Namely, it's this. there was one nutrient that started out our modern day conversation for the last 200 years that really has stuck with us, and it's so prominent, and it's also so controversial. I paid a price for even saying this, but I'm going to say it anyhow. Namely, it has to do with protein. You know, protein was discovered in 1839. In 1839. At that time, it was discovered as a substance in the meat of dogs, and it kept them alive. So once they isolated it, they had to have a name for it. So they thought around about a name, and they took the word from the Greek language, proteos, P-R-O-T-E-I-O-S, which means first or prime importance. So they called it protein after proteos. And then at that particular point in time, they had another thought. That disease is best described as a local disease. That was what they said, instead of a constitutional disease. That's one of the really major parts of history of the 1800s, and it crept into the 1900s. So we end up with so much focus on one thing at a time. May sound great, and it may be true. That's not the issue, and we may see results. So I've tried to work from that model, in a sense, in history, to recognize, you know, what that led to, and I come away with all these things working together, you know, in marvelous ways, which leads me to the holism thing. So I guess what I'm saying is that it's a little bit risky sometimes for me to focus on one thing, you know, or too much of one thing, even if it's nitric oxide. Yeah, sure. It's I understand it. It sounds good, but if we come away from this worship, which is what it's been, worship of protein because it's such a revered nutrient. And I think of it, you know, the most revered of all nutrients, in fact, have an effect on the most feared of all diseases, cancer, in a sense. That combination shows, I think, illustrates how we tend to go down this path sometimes. We have historically tried to explain things in a very detailed way like that, which sounds great. But I think for the message for the public at large, I kind of like the idea of the very generalized statement. Don't eat animals. I mean, I would have never said that when I started it, coming from the background that I had and the education I had. We don't need to eat animals, number one. Number two, when we're eating food from the plant kingdom, obviously, we try to eat them with all their contents as much as possible intact. We can dice them up, cut them up, we can cook them, and we can do this and that. Don't add a lot of stuff back to your point is well taken there, by the way, you know, on the added oil, because the added oil in a chemical sense is oxidizable. That's one of the really key components of that idea. So we don't need to add oil. We don't need to add refined sugar and salt any more than, you know, we can get away with. But in the meanwhile, just eat animals, and then your nitric oxide, your TMAO, you know, and all that, not only heart disease and the endothelium and so forth will work, but also have an opportunity for all these other things to come in and say, hey, I got something here too. And then actually create a physiological condition, especially endothelium, you know, this lining the vessels. I mean, but we can also talk about others, like I said. So we come away with I would suggest a fairly a simple message, but a controversial one, I will have to confess, because I've known that firsthand. Start talking about animal protein, then have the properties it does, which I'm convinced it does. It's a tough one, but somehow we've got to kind of face that proposition. And to back to your point, Mike, what can we do in the future? I sort of think I spent a lot of years in policy and that sort of stuff and trying to figure out, you know, what do you say to the public and so forth and so on. We get too complicated in that whole process. We talk about two things. We could talk about the exact amounts, this and the exact amounts of that. And I, from using the concept of dietary guidelines we do in the United States, I don't get too excited about those things, but nonetheless, you started talking about the wholeness of foods, divided into a couple of different groups. You know, we don't need to eat animal foods. That's it. We eat plant foods and a big variety, lots of different kinds. And we don't dump a lot of stuff back on it to make them taste good, to make us addicted to whatever it is we're trying to get them addicted to. And so anyhow, it's a couple of different perspectives, Mike. I think that's we have, but yet, we're going to exactly the same well water. I think we are. And I think you probably would agree. We've been doing this for how many years? Yes. 30 years.
32, yeah, at least. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's been fun. It's been great fun.
Yeah. And you mentioned controversy, but I've never seen either one of you really shy away from controversy. You speak the truth, you speak the science, and I appreciate that about both of you. So unfortunately, as I look at my watch, our time has just like flown by, but I do want to give you each a minute or two to give your closing thoughts or anything that you want to share, whether it be about each other or about nutrition or whatever you want to share. Maybe it's about your wives. I don't know, Ann and Karen, but just what are your closing comments? And we'll start with you, Dr. Esselstyn, and then Dr. Campbell, you will have the last word, so to speak.
I'm going to be very brief. Colin, it's been 31 years. And I guess what I admire so much is that you are who you are.
Okay. I'm going to say something very similar. I'm saying this from the heart. I've watched this. I've watched this happen. When I've watched Dr. Esselstyn, the way he would have come, we'd be together talking about this and that. He'd get a phone call. He always picked the phone call up. There was a patient, he always answered the phone. And so he really gave him his 100% attention. And the way he did it was a great deal of pleasantness in his voice, a great deal of caring, and he did it in such a nice way. If only we could have doctors like that around. Of course, Mike, I see you doing much the same thing. So the two of you have that in common. But I will say that one of the things about Dr. Esselstyn that I really appreciated in the very beginning was his thoughtfulness, his caring. He did. And, sort of gathered up what information he had and so forth and so on. Look what happened. Look what happened. They reversed the heart disease.
Yeah.
Oh, and Mike, one more thing. I had a note to myself here. This can't be forgotten. I'm glad you said it, Mike. Both of us have kingdoms behind us. We have a backstop. And I think Ess will agree to this. Ann and Ess have been fantastic. We've been married. I've been married, 61 years, and he's 62 years, Ess? Something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if we didn't have those two partners, I'm not sure we'd have been doing what we're doing. It's that simple.
Amen.
Yeah. Thank you for mentioning Karen and Ann. Both are just amazing. I haven't had the privilege of meeting Ann, but I have Karen on numerous occasions, and I would agree. And hearing you, Dr. Campbell, talk about Dr. Esselstyn, as I look back over his accolades, it's not a surprise at all that he's received awards for compassion in medicine. I think that's remarkable, and I'm learning from both of you, and I just appreciate your brilliance and your humbleness as you continue to move along in this whole world of science and medicine and nutrition. We've been blessed with a lot of wisdom that you've shared with us today, and I know our audience has gleaned lots of different things to take home today, and I just appreciate you all taking the time. I will mention again that this has been recorded, so if somebody needs to share, like, hey, I saw this great interview, fireside chat with Dr. Campbell, Dr. Esselstyn, it is going to be available, should be available in about a week. So yes, Dr. Esselstyn.
Just simply want to be sure that I know that Colin feels the same way. And neither of us could ever have made this happen without the support of Ann and Karen. And also we can't forget, both of us were very blessed to have wonderful children who have absolutely stood by us through this adventure. They're part of the pillar.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you both for your time. I think maybe we probably ought to do this again sometime. It's been a lot of fun, and Dr. Esselstyn's going, no, don't put me through this again.
The next 90 years.
No, we won't wait 90 years to do it again. We'll do it much sooner. But thank you both again, and we look forward to chatting again. On behalf of the T. Colin Campbell Center for Nutrition Studies, we appreciate your attendance today. And by the way, I just wanted to mention that over 6,000 people registered for this. We've never had anywhere close to that for a webinar. So you all were very, very popular and drew a lot of people from around the world. So it's exciting. Thank you so much. And we will sign off at this point unless Natasha is going to jump on and tell me anything differently.
Thank you.
Good night.